Hi everyone, I'm just going to go through some classroom activities for dyslexic students and it's some practical ideas to help your students to gain long-term memories which it will really aid their learning. And I've got these ideas from the book by Jess Fears called Building Reading Comprehension Habits. So let's look at some of the difficulties that dyslexic students encounter. So starting at the top, I'm going to go in a clockwise direction. We've got your spatial and temporal difficulties, and this is things like telling the time, knowing left to right, getting lost. They might find it difficult to follow a map. Moving on to memory difficulties, they would find difficulty in things such as sequences, phone numbers, alphabet, times tables, that type of thing. May not understand how to write a date correctly. Moving down to motor control, this might link in with dyspraxia. They might have coordination problems. Handwriting difficulties might lead to things like dysgraphia, where they don't have the muscle control. And that would lead to difficulty copying with anything from the board or from a text. So if we move on to reading, they might lose place in a text, overlapping or moving text on a page, and then the need to reread something because they've lost the place. Now that links in with the memory difficulties. So if they can't remember what they've written, what they've read, they might not be able to look at the page, and then they've forgotten what they've already read. So it goes around in a bit of a vicious circle, which is really quite difficult. Some dyslexics might have a problem with spelling. Now, some of the phonetic sounds are spelled differently. For example, the f sound can be spelled with an F or a PH, that type of thing. So the spelling of words might be phonetically correct, but the actual spelling of it might be incorrect. Listening, they might have a difficulty with background noise, and it might be things like the buzzing of an electronic speaker or something like that that's been left on. And because of this, they find the difficulty with note taking because they're listening too much to the distraction rather than what is happening in class. And it also goes back to your memory difficulty as well. So if you can't remember what somebody's just said, how can you write it down, that type of thing. And then if you're finding it difficult to spell, that doesn't go down on paper either. And then if you've got poor handwriting skills, you can't read what you're supposed to be writing, that you can't write down properly, and it all links in together. And then with writing, they would find difficulty getting ideas on paper. You hear them saying, I don't know where to start. They can't organise it, they can't find the right word to write down. So dyslexics, they might not show all of these symptoms, but you'll be able to start thinking about some students who you teach who might have one or maybe two or more of some of these difficulties that may not have even had a diagnosis of dyslexia, but are showing some of these difficulties in class, and we need to look at how to help them. So instead of looking at the difficulties, we're going to look at some of the strengths, and this is given to us by Reed and Kirk 2001. So they are actually very good at visual and spatial skills, for example in engineering, physical sciences. They have ability to recognise patterns of information and represent three-dimensional images, which is why mind mapping is very good for dyslexics and how they get that information down on the page. They have a facility for mentally rearranging designs and information. They have a holistic way of viewing the world, which aids the discovery of problem solutions. You'll also find that dyslexic students will, look at something and you'll find that they'll come up with a solution quicker than other people because they have a different way of thinking. They have a rich colour memory and ability to use the fast multisensory combinations. They're extremely creative with things like art, pottery, sewing, baking, that kind of thing. And they're actually excellent critical thinking skills. Okay, so background knowledge. So every student has got some kind of stores of background knowledge and experiences that need to be tapped into that would improve his or her comprehension of topics. So what we need to do is to help the students connect the background knowledge in order to carry out these life skills and these academic studies. And sometimes the students just need that little bit of help connecting this knowledge and their studies together, and by doing some of these activities that will be able to help. But you might ask yourself, if a student's got poor working memory, they've got poor literacy skills, how on earth am I going to help them? So this video is going to go through a few activities, and there's 15 of them all together, on how I'm going to help you to do that. So there are some practical activities. Now I need to remind you to remember, allow a dyslexic student more time in class for processing skills. That's one of their difficulties, and that dyslexics cannot work at speed. It might mean that you might need to repeat and repeat and repeat for some people to help them with that, putting them in on that memory shelf, and then hopefully into that long-term memory. We need to encourage students to find out their own way of working. They'll be more likely then to become independent thinkers and workers. So talk to them, find out, is this activity helping you? If not, move on to another one. And then they will be able to then find out the best way of learning in your lesson. I just need to remind you, dyslexia is not a level of IQ, so if they can't write and they can't read, it doesn't mean that they don't have a high IQ. Now, without any co-occurring difficulties, dyslexic students are often very, very talented in other areas, and they will show their strengths in other ways. Finally, before we go into any of these activities, talk to your student, find out what would work for them and what doesn't. It might be something as simple as putting a different background on your PowerPoint, on your whiteboard in the classroom, or just turning off the front lights, or not standing silhouetted in front of a window. That might help them to engage in your lesson. Okay, so the first activity is closed eyes visualize. Now this is a visualization technique for students who connect words to meanings. It helps with their mental organisation, and it gives them that picture, and a vivid mental picture that the student can create themselves, and it's more memorable for them. So, for example, I did this exercise with some of my Year 8 students. So I asked them to close their eyes, and I read this to them. Her name is Mrs. Pratchett. She was a small, skinny old hag with a moustache on her upper lip and a mouth as sour as a green gooseberry. She never smiled. She never welcomed us when we went in, and the only time she spoke was when she said things like, "I'm watching you, so keep your thieving fingers off them chocolates," or "I don't want you in here just to look around. Either you forks out or you gets out." So I said to my students, I would like you to close your eyes and listen to what I'm going to ask you to think about. So first of all, imagine a small woman. Imagine a small woman who is skinny. Imagine a small woman who is skinny and old. Imagine a small woman who is skinny and old and looks like a hag. And then we discussed what a hag was, because somebody says, "What's a hag?" So then we have that discussion, and layer by layer they add to the visualization that they already have. So then we continued. And imagine a small woman who is skinny and old and looks like a hag, and with a moustache on her top lip. So then they've got this new image. And again, and we added to that, and a mouth that is as sour as a green gooseberry. And then we have the discussion about, if you eat something that is sour, what does your face look like? What does your mouth look like? Well, it's downturned. Okay? And then we continue, and we just layer upon layer upon layer until we get to something like a small woman who is skinny and old and looks like an old hag, with a moustache on the top of her lip, with a mouth as sour as a green gooseberry, and who never smiles, and I asked them to imagine what her voice would sound like. Would it be sweet sounding or harsh and sharp? Okay, and that's the type of thing to give them the time and the visualize. It will help to really stay into that memory bank. And then I also, just to add on, is to encourage them to draw to see what they have in their mind, and then compare it with an image in the book. Okay, so did your student imagine what the author's image was in the book? Okay, so activity 2 is anticipation guides plus why. So apologies for the small font on this slide, but there was a lot of information I wanted to get down. So this can be applied to fiction or non-fiction, depending on how you want to adapt it. First of all, you need to identify the major concepts of the reading or lesson, and then create a statement that questions certain notions, beliefs or opinions that may challenge what students already know. So write your questions or statements in the numbered boxes and make a copy for each of the students. So in the next slide I'll show you the example that was in the book. The questions are: computers are better teachers than humans. In the future, computers will wage war on us. Life would be easy without computers, and a computer would make a good president. So these are the types of questions that you can create. So then you would hand out the guide and briefly explain the statement. Okay, so the students will mark their responses of agreement either or disagreement in the before reading column. So you would create this statement, and before you read the text that you're planning on doing, the students will make their decision whether they agree or disagree with that statement before they have read anything. And then the students will have to give reasons for their opinions by answering the why question on the left under each statement. So they answer the question whether they agree or disagree, and then put the reason why. And then you have the students read the text. So for the text to speak dyslexic students wherever possible. And then during the reading, the students would mark the after reading column and fill in the reasons why. So would they agree or disagree, and the reasons why after they've completed the reading. And then at the very end you conduct a discussion comparing the before and after results. Your discussion should refer to evidence on the text and should cover the students' reasons for changes in their answers before and after. Okay. So this is the example of the questions. So A would be strongly agree, B agree somewhat, C disagree somewhat, D or disagree strongly. And what you'll find is that dyslexic students can often verbalise their understanding much better than writing it down. And you can create the evidence by recording speech to text on if it's a Microsoft Word or other software. And if they were happy to, you could sit and video the discussion just to prove that you have this evidence of understanding and learning from the activity. Okay, so activity 3 is background knowledge backpack. Okay, so you can read aloud a text to students, or for the technology you can use the read aloud technology on the computer for the dyslexic student, and you would stop several times to fill in the pockets of the backpack, which will be shown on the next slide. You can model this activity lots and lots of times so that the student can use different types of background knowledge, and then you would read the text or use the text-to-speech technology from where you left off and pause certain times to fill in the pockets of the backpack with the information that they've learned. So you would let your students know that there's no set order, and all 3 types of background knowledge would be listed on the sheet to be used for your My BK pockets. Okay, you'd have the student explain the text pocket response and how their background knowledge helped them to understand the material, and have students share with the class as you write a similar diagram on the board. So this is an example of the backpack. So I think this would be applicable to more of the Key Stage 3 students, because it looks like it's quite fun. You can tell them that they're going on an adventure. Let's see what we can pack into our backpack, what knowledge can we use. Okay, and this is of course meant to be referred to as many times as they need to help with their memory. So you can also put this on a Word document and use the read aloud function for the text boxes, or speech to text to help them fill those in. Okay, and this can be updated and printed if you need it as evidence in the book. Okay, so Catapult into Literature. It's a pre-reading activity. So Catapult and Thieves is used to help students launch into the works of literature. Okay, so this is an activity that you would use before you've actually starting to read the full text. It might be Shakespeare, it might be Christmas Carol, whatever you're using for GCSE. And it helps students to mentally prepare as many ideas about the concept as much as possible before they actually read the text. It allows a better framework to which attach details and ideas, and it gives them this mental picture as well. And they will less likely get lost in it when they start to read. Okay, so Catapult. It's an anagram for covers, author, title, audience, page 1, underline message, look at the visuals, maps or sketches, time, places and characters. So this would need to be modelled for the students so that they can see how useful it would be. Students can take notes, or for those students who find it difficult to take notes, then they could possibly use an audio device to help with the notes that to help them remember, so they'll be able to listen back to that as many times as they need to when they're completing the actual task. You can create a worksheet for students to complete, such as this on the slide, and then have students share their findings and encourage discussion. So again, to be able to create the evidence, you might need an audio or a video to show that the dyslexic student can use the verbal skills and be able to show you that they have in fact learned something in that lesson. So activity 5 is called Thieves. I really like this activity. So it's a pre-reading activity to help students organise their thoughts about the book before reading it, and it could be a really intimidating script such as Romeo and Juliet or Macbeth, or something that's really quite daunting from a dyslexic point of view. So it builds on pre-reading habits, and if you continue to do this throughout their education, they will get into that really good habit that will remain with the student for life. Now it goes through the necessary steps before diving into the undertaking of going into the GCSE questions. It builds an extensive knowledge of the background of the book even before they start to read the first chapter. Okay, so we're going to tell students they're about to steal some information from the book which will help to make their learning richer, and they're going to use the anagram of thieves. So thieves means the title, the heading, the introduction, everything I know, any visuals, end of chapter material, and so what. If you look at the slide, you can use these questions to help you create a bookmark for each of the books or the texts or the literature that you're about to embark on. So you would have to model how to go through the steps. For each chapter, I would suggest to make a bookmark and encourage students to complete it as they read through the book or the chapter for each one of these bookmarks. It's important to encourage dyslexic students to discuss their ideas to improve on topic vocabulary, and the dyslexic student to get them to verbalise their ideas. And by doing that, it gives them this real sense of achievement. I would also suggest using an audio device to help with the memory, and of course if they keep it with them, it might be on their phone, to be able to listen to it over and over again, so that it will help their memory and it will help with their homework, and they can listen to that as many times as they need to. So this is an example that I put together using Smart Art on PowerPoint. It's a bookmark. It's an example of the Thieves bookmark, and it's a place for students to write their notes on. And you can use this and change it and adapt it to however you want to do it. Incidentally, all of these activities are in the book. There are some resources at the back of Jeff's book that you can use and photocopy, which is another reason why I suggest that you purchase the book, because the actual resources are actually really very helpful, that you can just photocopy and put them onto from a PDF onto a Word document, and you can use them in the classroom. Okay, so activity 6, concept poster preview. This is a really good technique to help with the memory skills of the student. So it helps to build the background knowledge, and it allows the poster to be in the classroom for future reference if the dyslexic student comes into the next lesson, they've forgotten what they did the previous lesson. So this is completed by the teacher, and as the lesson is discussed, more will be drawn on the poster. It's a multi-sensory way of learning. They must be able to listen and to be able to see what you're drawing on the poster, to be able to make those meaningful memory links. So what you would do with this activity is decide which key points that you need to get your students to remember from the text that you are learning about, and think about how you can draw these on 1 or 2 large posters. So you can include illustrated timeline, it can be a diagram, it can be a storyboard, a character description. If we go back to Mrs. Pratchett in the earlier example, in this visualising exercise, you could maybe do this on the poster afterwards. It can include an illustrated cause and effect chart, a map, a drawing, or a scene, etc., etc., whichever you want to do. So I would suggest that you would lightly sketch it in pencil in the main lines, the symbols and words, or the poster that you would like to cover when you fill in the poster for the class. And then you would mount the poster on the wall, or on a whiteboard, or somewhere where the whole class can see. And as you draw, you would draw over your pencil line with your thick pen as planned. Now you can use props, you can use drama, physical objects, or anything that you need to aid the memory and build a meaningful vocabulary link. Flashcards are really good to be able to stick onto the poster as well by the students. Ask the students to spell out new words for you and check that they understand their meanings as well. So this technique allows the student to learn about the need without the need for painful writing, and it also opens up the discussion. And again, it's about taking or looking for learning, and it's not always about writing it down in an essay what you've learned. It's about having that discussion with the dyslexic student, making sure that they understand. And it's important to keep the poster on the wall for future references and spelling revision, and refer back to it very often. Number 7's activity is called Critique Chart. So if you look at the bottom right hand corner of the slide, this is a table of questions according to whichever text you are studying at the time. And it's a process of critiquing and evaluating a text that uses the student's background knowledge of how information should be communicated. It allows the student to learn what is in the text, but it also gives them a chance to evaluate it, so giving them a chance to improve it, criticise it and challenge it, and using much more mature vocabulary than what possibly they might be used to. It overlaps the skills of questioning and monitoring comprehension, gives them an opportunity to critique and putting more ownership and engagement into the hands of the students. And then as they complete the chart, the students will develop their communication skills also. So it's not always about how much they write down. And also, again, you can use the speech to text technology, but it's about their communication skills. So again, you might want to use a video to record a discussion about a certain topic. So what you would do is you would model the using of the critiquing and text using the chart that you can be able to see on the next slide in much more detail. It could be a textbook chapter, a novel, a short story, it could be an advertisement, a discussion about a painting, etc. You can write your ideas as you think aloud or use the technology, the speech to text technology, about different boxes in the chart. You need to emphasise how the boxes should support the author's overall purpose, and emphasise how you connect your experiences and your knowledge of what kind of writing best communicates to you. You'd go through the chart and have the students write in their input. You'd encourage the students to speak aloud when writing their answers, and this would help with their multisensory recognition of spelling and sentence structure. It's really important if when learning to do this, it's a new skill to learn and it's not always automatic. If you're taking notes, point out the differences between using full sentences and using keywords and why. Okay, it's a little bit like a mind map. You wouldn't write a full sentence in a mind map. Speech to text can be used on Microsoft Word for this exercise for those people that have difficulty in writing and spelling. I'd also suggest pairing students to read another text together with the critique chart in mind, and have them jot down positives and negatives, and then students should discuss what to write before writing their final draft. So this is an example of what you could have the critique chart look like. Obviously you can adapt those questions to whatever information you want the students to focus on. Activity number 8, give one, get one. I really like this activity because it's a social way for students to share knowledge and tap into background knowledge from a text. It's very much like brainstorming, but it's much more social. You need to think carefully about your groups and the need for writing, so pairs may be needed if a dyslexic student has poor penmanship. So on the top right hand corner you'll see an example of a very basic idea that you can give and ideas that you can get from other people. So what you would do is you generate a topic in the text in class and then put it on a board. You create an open-ended discussion, such as something like what I know about Wales, keywords for studying space, or what we learned last month about electricity, and it could be about anything that you're studying. Give them students a piece of paper and fold it in half horizontally, and on the top you write number 1 to 4, and underneath you'd write 5 to 8. So you can see an example of what it could look like. You have your students write their own ideas of what they need to discuss on numbers 1 to 4, and then as you go through around the room, the students would pair up and exchange ideas for 1 to 1. So they would give one idea, number 1, and they would get an idea from somebody and write it in their number 5, and they would go through until they've filled the sheet. So students would write down the name of the students on 5 to 8 of who they've got their idea from, and then I would keep it short. Just after a few minutes, they would regroup and share with the class what the ideas they've got from other students. And this goes back to verbal ideas. Dyslexic students very often are much more verbally expressive than they are writing down. You would encourage them to use the more mature language of your subject. Things like, Julie had a similar thought, or Mark predicts that. Okay, so as they're going through school, they need to create this more mature vocabulary. And then you would discuss the responses. So again, I've said that the dyslexic students, they might prefer to give a verbal understanding rather than through skilled writing. And again, you might think about having an audio recorder or a video, which will give you evidence of the learning. Okay, activity 9, KWL, is used for a research task. So it's to help scaffold the background information. So it uses 3 columns to help them make a plan of what they are going to research. So what they think that they know, what they want to know, and what they have learned. Okay, so in addition to teaching students the connection to background knowledge, it also helps to develop a habit of questioning, summarising, predicting, inferring, and figuring out new word meanings. So the procedure for KWL, you would create 3 columns and head them with what we think we know, what we want to know, and what we have learned. So what we would do with this is you would prompt a discussion about a subject or a text that you're about to study or research. Use visuals as well to help the dyslexic student to recall what it is that you need to research. So remember, dyslexic students often prefer to verbalise their understanding, and therefore they will feel much more at ease with this part of the task. So the first column is going to be completed using the written information or drawings or visual evidence of background knowledge. So what do we know already? Column 2 will be filled with questions. So you may need a scribe for this part, or working in pairs, or you may have the speech-to-text technology. And then you would have the students go away and complete the research. And then the third column is going to answer the questions that they've written in the second column. And again, this table can be put into Microsoft Word to allow this dyslexic to insert visuals or use the speech-to-text technology. You could also use mind maps or Venn diagrams to help the dyslexic student to organise their thoughts. So the KWL activity can be adapted depending on the level of research that you might need to do for your task. So it might be that you need to have the students practice the referencing. So wherever you're doing your research, can you confirm it? Can you find the source? So you need to practice finding the website or the book reference or the author reference, and you need to complete that table. So if you just have a look at this slide, and you can decide in which detail that you would like to use for the task in your lesson. And then going further into the KWL activity, this is the actual photocopy from Jeff Sphere's book. It just shows a KWL plus activity of how you can integrate mind mapping for the dyslexic student to be able to organise the thoughts. Activity 10, Pro, Con, Improv. Now this activity was adapted from Dufala in 1987, and it helps to build oral skills and the ability to think about the pros and cons of a topic. And it could be absolutely anything at all. It helps to build the background knowledge for text with different perspectives, helps to give them an open mind, and help them to problem with multiple solutions, and it helps students to become critical readers, thinking about the multiple points of view as they read and go through some kind of literacy text. It can become an effective and foundational activity for variations that you can use throughout the year as the complexity in the subject matter increases. Okay, so what we need to do, the procedure for this, is to model it first. So what you would do is you would stand in front of the class and asking one of your students to be director. So the director gives you a topic and says pro, and they can clap if they want to. So as the speaker, you say one or two convincing reasons for the topic, so the pros for the topic, and then the director claps again and says con, and then you immediately switch to the negative aspects of the topic using the academic transitions such as but, however, on the other hand, and yet, and etc. And that helps to improve the mature language and the mature vocabulary of the students. And then you would do that 2 or 3 more times to show them how to do it. Then you would give your students your list of topics that you need to choose from, or you could focus on one topic that you're learning about. And an example could be, should Scrooge give to the charity collectors? And then you would put your students in pairs and have them alternate between the director and the speaker. And this encourages students to show the pros and cons, not only with their voice, but also ask them to show their body language, their movement, and their facial expressions. So, when you finish practicing, the students perform then for the class. And then the director would assess the speaker's work with feedback such as, my speaker did an amazing job, or you could use the 3 stars and a wish technique. You'd assess the transition from the pro to the con and back again, and was there a good use of the academic language that you're teaching them? And then finally, by giving them a task such as this, it allows the dyslexic student to generate ideas and opinions before, during or after reading the text or novel, and allows them to connect such thoughts as they read. Number 11, quick writes. So quick writes is exactly what it says. It requires each student to reach inside their mind and pull something out that is related to your lesson to prompt and organise it on paper. And if you want to, you can actually mime it and reach it and pull it into your head and pull something out. It gives them a visual of what they've got to do. So they're really informal. It's a low stress way to help jumpstart the brain for each student, and particularly for those who don't like sharing it in the whole class brainstorming kind of session. It's also a way for a student to organise their thoughts on what they've just learned, and just enough to write down, and a way to formatively assess their understanding and their ongoing learning. So get your sticky notes at the ready. So really quickly, you give them a sticky note and ask them a question related to what you're teaching them, and have them write down whatever comes into their head on the sticky note. So in the example here, it's about a science project. So offer some support to somebody who might find it difficult to put into words and they might have a limited word vocabulary. They might have a teaching assistant to help them to write it down. Remind them it's not about correct spelling or grammar, it's just a quick write. And then the sticky note can become part of a student's journal or the workbook. And then you would encourage the student to revisit and reread what they've written whenever they have a chance to look at their book as a bit of a time filler and as a recap of what they did maybe last lesson or the lesson before. Activity 12. A quick write variation is pen go, pen stop. Okay, so in this variation, students are given a minute at the end of a lesson to think about what they've just learned. So the teacher will give them a sticky note and they'd say pen go. They would give them a minute and then pen stop. And this challenges the student to write at speed and try to make sense of what they're writing at the same time. So the sticky note will be left in the book, and it can also be a way for the teacher to assess what the student has learned and remembered during the lesson. And then Some students may want to draw a picture or a mind map of what they can remember. It's also a really good way of students to flick back from last lesson to remind them what they did before they start the new lesson. Activity 13, sticky note snapshots. So this is a visualising activity that can be used for both fiction and non-fiction, and it uses large sticky notes, and it's effective because it allows students to move the images while creating them to meet the specific needs of the text. So other habits that are developed with the activity include inferring, predicting and summarising. So going back to at the very beginning of this presentation, I said that there are some dyslexic students that are very creative and they're very artistic, and you can use this to their benefit by drawing mind maps or pictures as they are learning. You may only need to use this for just a small number of students, but I think it would be really useful for them. So this is an example of this activity. Students will be allowed to draw pictures or diagrams from their mind's eye, from their visualization techniques, and draw them on a sticky note, and this will help them choose the most important pieces of information that they're listening to and to help visualize. Just remember, this is not a copying exercise, so they're not looking up and looking down and looking up and looking down to help copy something. It's about what they visualize in their heads. It's important to discuss what they've drawn afterwards and selecting keywords to accompany the drawing and making sure they are put in the correct place. And you can use this as a writing framework for their classwork. Activity 14 is called Think, Pair and Share, and it's exactly what it says on the tin. So the procedure for this would be to create a question from what you're studying, and it will prompt the students to use their background knowledge and experience to answer it. The students will have to think in silence for 60 seconds to help mentally prepare what they're going to say, or again, give them a sticky note to write down their thoughts. Then you would pair them up and they would face their partner. They would take it in turns, talking and showing interest and listen. And they must stay on topic. So this is really good training for communication skills. They must then remember what their partner has said, and then they would share to the group. So it's an aid for memory, it's an aid for taking notes, and it's an aid for communication skills. And then you would bring the class together and they would discuss what was said for each of the questions. And then if you've got time in the class, then you would swap questions. Now, because dyslexic students are much more at ease given a verbal communication to provide evidence of learning, you might want to consider using video evidence or an audio recording device to show the evidence of the knowledge, possibly for an assessment. Activity 15 is text structure graphic organisers. So many students with dyslexia would need help with the organising of their writing. So some triggers you may see from a dyslexic is them saying things like, I don't know where to start. So you might find that some dyslexic students can read quite ably, but they find it difficult to organise their thoughts as they don't stay in the short-term memory long enough so that they can start it. So they must start again, and there's this vicious circle of having to go round and round and getting frustrated. So you can use some of these graphic organisers in your lessons to help the dyslexic students remember what they have to write about. Now, it's important to remind them, once it's been completed and they start to write, that they must cross off what they've already used so that they don't write it twice. And by using these frequently would create good habits. Now, if you use the correct visual, the student will have a greater understanding of what the objective of the task is. So, as a description, this is an example of a mind map. and you would have the topic either at the top or at the bottom or in the middle. It would explain an idea, a person, a place or a thing, and you would give them a list of keywords that they would need to use with that type of organisation and description. Something very simple is like this, but not in as much detail, is if they're under time pressure for exams, they would circle the keywords in a question that they need to write about, and then in the margin on the left, write the keywords that they need to remember, and then as they're writing their paragraph, cross off what they've remembered that they have to write about, and then that would help them with their organisation of their answer. Okay, by using this visual for a sequence, it would describe the order of events or how to make something new. So there's the arrows. We know that we always read from left to right, so the arrows would naturally go from left to right. And look at the key words. We've got first, second, and then. So they are time connectives. So by using this and the correct arrow, the dyslexic students understand that it is a timely description or an order of events. So a cause and effect kind of visual would be something like this. So you would start off with one thing. So this one, for example, bats, they carry a deadly virus, and then the ripple effect. So the effects of what has happened to the first instance, and then the effects that would happen on the second incident, and then the third and the fourth, and so on. And if you take out one of those incidents, then the rest would be stopped. So look at the keywords. These are what we need to use for a cause and effect type of visual. So when you're talking about persuasion, if we have the scale, and you can see there are for and against arguments, this gives the visual and the understanding that there is two sides or an issue or an argument, and one side will be weighted more than the other, and the student then will be able to decide which argument goes on which side and which one is weighted better than the other side. So compare and contrast using a Venn diagram such as this shows that there are some subjects that would overlap. Okay, and I've just used this Christmas Carol Ghost. You've got the past, the present and the future, and what are the similarities and what are difference. So you are comparing and contrasting. Use the keywords and make sure that the student understands where that keyword would go in between the overlaps. Now it starts off with a problem and then comes out with a solution. This visual shows that it would start off with one thing and then it would lead on to another, and then that would lead on to something else. So look at the keywords. Where would you put the keywords? What would be the first problem? How would you get to do it? And what would be the final solution? So I'd just like to say thanks very much for taking the time out to watch this video with these 15 activities. Again, I can't stress enough how fantastic the book of Building Reading Comprehension Habits by Jeff Spheres has been so helpful to me, and how I help my students that do have real difficulties in the classroom, how to get their thoughts from their head onto paper. Or using technology, or even just to record evidence of learning. Thanks very much for watching. Remember to like and share the video for the channel, Calmond Education, and I hope it's been very useful. Thanks very much. Bye.